Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today, Developing a Strategic ICS/OT Cybersecurity Roadmap Using Intelligence and Consequence-Driven Analysis, as easy as ABC. Let's meet our speakers. Robert Lee is a pioneer in the industrial security incident response and threat intelligence community, and he's the CEO and founder of Dragos. Ramsey Haj is an ICS leader in the cyber risk function at Deloitte & Touche and provides expertise on technical risk, data production, and privacy concerns to Deloitte's clients with a focus on industrial products and advanced manufacturing. With that, we're ready to go, and we will be recording this and sending it out in a couple of days to everybody. Thank you.
All right.
So good afternoon, everybody. Hey, Rob, nice to see you virtually here in these interesting times.
Of course.
I think, we wanted to set the stage here and really kind of keep this conversational. But in late 2019, Deloitte and MAPI conducted a survey of about 250, 300 executives and participants from a variety of manufacturing organizations, chemical producers, really a wide cross-section, looking at what the pressing issues on securing operational technology was. So we move to the next one here. We'll dig in a little bit to some of these results. So we really started off with kind of a base question, looking at just for awareness around what OT risks and what may exist. So one of the questions around, are you aware of your organization's operational technology security program? And it was interesting in the responses that we received, where you can see some of the stats here on the pie chart, saying that they're aware and somewhat involved, but there was a large portion either that was not aware or just did not have a level of maturity to understand kind of where they sat. When we asked about risk assessments in the space, we heard back 4 out of 10 companies saying that they actually conducted these risk assessments. And again, we kind of came back and questioned some of these numbers. I don't know, Rob, your thoughts kind of on the stats? I think they're interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And so I appreciate that folks are taking the time out to kind of get to know their environments and answer this kind of survey. But as we want to present the security roadmap kind of discussion in today's topic and give you all a point of view about how to do it, I think it's important to lay the stage and sort of the state of the union and what people are seeing around the sectors. And to me, what in my own kind of anecdotal experience aligns very well with these stats, where most companies are not even aware of what necessarily they're doing in operations. Sometimes we'll even see IT security just say, well, the plants have it, or the manufacturing side of the house has it, or the oil and gas side of the house has it. They're doing stuff. And then you talk to them and they go, oh yeah, IT security is doing stuff. Like, a little bit of misaligned. But the other piece is for those that are aware and involved, we continually see the myth form. And again, in 2020, we should be beyond this, but we're not. We continually see the myth form that, they're segmented off, maybe not air gapped, but segmented off, and there's no real risk on that side of the house. But people aren't actually doing anything with visibility or doing the security assessments at a frequency enough to understand what is happening there. So although a good % of them are involved, and yeah, there are some that are doing some security assessments, maybe majority not doing many at all. My own experience and our own experience at Dragos would say that folks are taking it seriously by and large, like they want to do the right thing. But a lot of folks are trying to see from the enterprise into the operations environment instead of in the operations environment out. And it might be true that it's difficult to get to your operations environment from your enterprise. We don't find that to be common, but it can exist, that it's difficult. But what's very common is you have a lot more connectivity and risk on the operations side of the house than you realize, because you have integrations, connections and maintenance and vendors and OEMs and et cetera coming out of the plant side of the house, out of the operations environment. So by and large, there are some companies getting this right. But I would say that the metrics align to kind of the topic of today, that a lot of people are in a starting place as it relates to really getting their security roadmap into a sort of.
No, and I think it's a great point, and kind of we make the disclaimer there on the bottom that these numbers may be significantly overstated when considering OT risk, and I think that kind of segues nicely to the next kind of batch of stats we have here, questions we asked around kind of what folks saw as the major risks in their OT environment. And as Rob and I were looking at this, the first thing we did notice was that this is making a big assumption that you have complete visibility into your environment and you understand what you have. The other interesting piece is folks are concerned about state-sponsored terrorism, certainly as an attack, but as we can all attest to these days, and seeing how many of my clients and colleagues are operating today, black swan events and global pandemics are something folks never gave a thought to. But suddenly your tabletop exercises, your DR plans, all these are front and center, and the cracks begin to show very quickly.
And that's actually, and the whole black swan event thing is actually a really interesting piece. So my background, working a lot more sort of as an intelligence analyst over the years and sort of security operations, it's a type of analysis that we have to force ourselves to go through for high impact, low probability events. And as security practitioners, we're not always good at that. It's very easy to focus on the enterprise where we see phishing emails and things all day long, but where we're not getting the visibility into what's happening in the operations, we may not be attracted to it as much, or may not be paying it as much consideration because we don't think as much is going on there. But not only, to Ramsey's comment, we may not have the visibility to even make those kind of assessments. Those industrial attacks that we are concerned with most are low frequency. It's a lot more common than people realize, and a lot of stuff is not in the media about it. But it's still way more impactful to your company. It's that high impact, low probability analysis. And I've had discussions with security professionals plenty of times. They go, well, I've got to focus on the enterprise more because I see more stuff there. And it's like, yeah, but all of the revenue for your company is on the other side of the house. I think you should be addressing the risk of both of those sides of the environment, because it is one company at the end of the day.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and it's going to hit home on the topic here as we progress here in the discussion. Really looking at how you're meeting business objectives, how you're meeting your security objectives and your operational objectives, in a way that's you're going to be successful.
Yeah, and real quick, so I do want to answer questions as we go through this. There was one that just came in as well. Sort of, are there any correlations between these, like unauthorized access and operational disruption? I think these stats, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ramsey, are related to the perception, like the concerns of the folks. I don't think they're themselves correlating them. However, there is a strong correlation there. If it was based on sort of real events versus concerns. The one you actually gave the question is really good about even an IT person maybe unauthorized in the environment to do the things they're doing, pushing a patch when they're not supposed to, causing disruption. These things happen really, really commonly. We consistently see things all the time of folks accidentally taking down their environments or taking down their plants, whether it's through intense vulnerability scanning or active querying of controllers when they really didn't test it out that thoroughly. That kind of stuff still happens quite a bit. So yeah, it's a very fair question.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And kind of to build on that, this was kind of asked of a variety of executives. So it did have engineering teams, but it was already all the way to chief financial officers and kind of factory owners. So it was really kind of what is at top of mind, what were they thinking about when this survey was conducted? Again, as we expect, unauthorized access and disruption kind of at the top of the scale and as it slides down, but these are all fairly consistent with what we see and hear, minus the monitoring portion that we talked through before. Maybe we can look at the next batch here. That'll take us, answer a little bit about the question of the ability to detect and respond in their operational technology environments. And it was very interesting on the level of confidence that that we saw in a lot of the respondents. And, again, I think there's also an education portion of that where the respondents may have confused kind of how they're operating in their IT organizations and what kind of incident response and recovery capabilities they have there versus what's existing in the operational technology environment. And I think that kind of speaks to that divide or miscommunications that occur fairly often.
Absolutely. I routinely go and talk to CSOs and CEOs and execs of companies. They go, oh yeah, we got this robust logging, robust visibility and similar. And then somebody in the room has to pipe up and go, well, in the enterprise, not actually in the ops. I'm like, what do you mean we haven't been doing that in the ops? I think kind of one of the things I've joked about before is that the moment your CEO realizes that you're spending more money on your website security than your gas turbine security, it's a really interesting day around the boardroom.
No, that's absolutely right. So the statistics, while interesting, again, I think are probably being optimistic, but it's better than where it was a few years back, where some of these weren't even a discussion item on any of the tables that we may be sitting at and talking at today.
Absolutely.
So if we kind of move to the next one here, we kind of distilled these down to the top 6 initiatives that we extracted kind of from the report, what we see in the field, kind of working with our partners and such, but nothing unexpected here, I don't think, Rob. The alignment between business, operational technology, and information technology, I don't think we can harp on that one enough. The visibility, again, a little bit of a chicken egg problem we see. You want to have this alignment, you want to understand what you have, but you need that visibility first. Extending network segmentation, of course, this is something we see fairly common. A lot of projects being undertaken around that today. Managing identities and managing your third parties and vendors, again, falls right in line with folks, concerns with unauthorized access and vendor access into facilities. And then, as we get towards the bottom here, and Rob, we're going to talk on this more, but really looking at how you're leveraging threat intelligence and threat management platforms within your operational technology environment, as well as your information technology environment, and looking at the intersection there. And then, of course, last but not least, those enhanced response and recovery capabilities to really give you the same level that you would have in your information technology organization. You'd afford that same capability down to your operational technology teams.
And I think, I'll kind of weave in the questions as we go through and kind of my answers here, but we as a community, again, aren't really good at predicting the high impact, low visibility, low probability things. There's not a ton of research around that, and there's a little bit, and kind of DOE has even done some like consequence driven cyber informed engineering kind of projects before around that. However, we as a community, and this gets into the problem. Now we talk about kind of state of the union. We have limited visibility. We know there's some things we should be doing. There's that like list of 6 things, and we can all get to generally around the same list of things we want to be able to do. But the problem is, of course, how do you do it? And this is where a lot of the guidance always falls short. I routinely get brought in with executives that go, I kind of get what I'm supposed to do, or I kind of have an idea of what I think I'm supposed to do. I have no idea how to actually go roll this out correctly. And so the point of this webcast is really to give you some tools. It's not going to be the end all be all, but it's going to be an approach that I have found to be extremely effective across a number of folks we've worked with, whether it be in oil and gas or manufacturing or electric or rail and a wide variety of other industries. But a common problem I see, even that's not on this list, this goes to another one of the questions asked, is we tend to be a very standards and compliance driven community. And the problem with that is not the standards and frameworks themselves. Actually, usually the standards and frameworks and compliance can actually have quite a bit of value as you try to go on and apply it. But a lot of the standards, compliance, and regulations are the trailing edge of security, not what you need to be doing to keep up with the threats and risks that you have today. They're good foundations oftentimes, but a lot of standards are usually written for ICS, often taking IT security best practices and copy and pasting the ones that don't break the operations environment into the operations environment. So it's not even necessarily addressing unique risks to operations. It's just, here's the IT stuff you do that doesn't break the ICS. And so we want to be a little bit more tailored than that. So I'm not saying don't use standards and frameworks. What I'd actually like you to do, and what I'm going to walk you through as an approach, is developing what security would look like correctly for your environment. Then you map it back to the standards and frameworks and make sure you have coverage. Don't let the standards and frameworks be the driver of how you do it or be the only driver in how you do it. Otherwise, you're going to get into that classic issue of being more compliance and standard driven. So I do think you should essentially customized based on what you're seeing out in threat landscape, as well as some of those high impact, low probability consequences.
And that's, you're right with the on the standards piece. I know folks do get wrapped up in that, and as you said, standards are fantastic bases to start with, but don't have that necessarily drive everything that you are doing. You're going to have to look and rationalize, as we'll talk through, and we'll look through here. And I can't believe, Rob, that you said you wouldn't solve all the world's problems in like the next 35 minutes within this webinar. So you'll try.
But I mean, that's the problem though, right? We'll always say like, you should have an incident response plan. It's like, okay, but how and what? You should have an incident response plan. It's like, okay, the risk with getting specific is it may not be applicable to your environment. So people like to stay high level and vague because it's applicable to everybody. The point of webcasts like this is to get specific. Your mileage may vary, but it's to actually have a point of view so that you can decide for yourself. So what's the biggest problems I see with security roadmaps today? And I've seen this, we've been very fortunate to be involved in a lot of these with a lot of our clients. We don't like do this as a service. We actually usually partner up nicely with Deloitte. Like our business at Dragos is around our ICS security technology, which is like the visibility and monitoring side, as well as what we do with our intel and services folks like incident response. But just as a service to our clients, kind of usually pro bono, we'll have these conversations with them on kind of the roadmap discussion. And a very common issue I see, sort of number one, is that we'll get very technology focused. And we all know that is a problem, but we'll almost treat the roadmaps as like the buying wish list across the next 5 years. And that can't be the answer.
No.
The second issue I commonly see is that folks will try to pick one control, and maybe they'll pick like 50 controls they want to do, and they'll try to roll them out everywhere all at once for this almost peanut butter spread. And what that causes is you might find that segmentation is one of the programs you want to do, and you put it in your roadmap for the first 6 months, and then 6 to 12 months I want to roll out identity access control and similar. What you do is you end up creating a roadmap that's 3 to 5 years long, where the final controls that you want to do are in year 3 or 5, which means
you're unprotected, perhaps.
Yeah, you're unprotected on your critical assets. Exactly. And so if you know that you've got crown jewels or critical assets, you know what right looks like, you need to deploy them all there first. And you're rolling out the effort kind of on this risk-based approach across your organization instead of letting the control be the thing that you're rolling out in parallel. You're going to run into challenges on the operations side where you're going to have, take electric as an example. You might have one power generation site. You have a really good relationship with the OEM. And Emerson, Siemens, Honeywell, whatever, it doesn't matter which one, you might have a really good relationship with them that your operations side has developed. And so it's really quick to do things. You might not have that relationship developed at another site. And so even though it's still a power generation site, rolling out those efforts there may take considerably longer at that site than they do at the first one. And so what you don't want to do is get this kind of backed up rail car scenario where your entire program is getting slowed down because all of your sites are not homogeneous. They're actually heterogeneous kind of sites.
I think you can't beat on that one enough, Rob. We can't tell you how many times we've kind of looked at organizations, worked in organizations where, as you said, yes, technically maybe they make the same thing at all 10 of these locations, but you know what, everybody does it a little bit differently. Not taking into account kind of the business needs, everything from looking at, yes, the level of risk to your organization, but even down to what does your scheduling process look like within that plant? Do you actually have the ability to open up windows to actually do this work and remediate it? Because there's nothing worse than giving a roadmap to an organization that, as you said, tells you these wonderful things, 3 to 5 years of how you're going to get there, but you'll be exposed in the meantime. But these aren't consumable chunks, and these aren't, chunks that maybe there was value in it if you actually finished it in year 1, but maybe there's not value in year 3 anymore. Yeah. But really looking at what's driving that, and what your current risk is, not what your past risk was.
Absolutely. And this goes to one of the questions coming in anyways, is what I commonly see on the sort of the other way of doing this when people create that giant list of 20, 30 controls across 3 to 5 years they want to do, is you go and talk to those companies in the second iteration of it. You go, hey, how far did you get last time over the last 3 years? We did 2 things completely, and then like 3 of them kind of half done out of like 30. You're like, okay, let's not repeat that same mistake. Let's talk about taking a different approach. And then probably the last two on the slide there that I see most commonly is that everybody wants to have one overarching roadmap. And there's nothing wrong with having kind of that unified approach to your company, but you're not going to have the same strategy to IT and OT. And to Ramsey's point, you're not going to actually have the exact same implementation of the strategy at every OT site. Not like everything OT is the same. Every wellhead versus refinery is going to be different. And so, yeah, it's a nice goal, but OT's got to be treated differently. And you may roll into the same sort of overall plan, but probably the biggest thing I hate seeing is when I walk in and I see a security roadmap and OT security is like one thing on their 3-year roadmap. I'm like, oh man, no, you got to have a actual roadmap for the OT side of the house. And what we'll talk about as I actually start getting into this is, in my opinion, I've seen organizations have most success when they take consideration of the threat landscape and consequence. So instead of, again, frameworks to map the other way, think through threat scenarios that you care about. If you're an electric utility and you've ignored the Ukraine attacks, that's not a good idea. If you're a manufacturer and you haven't thought through what a ransomware worm would look like in your environment, that's not a good idea, right? So we want to take threat scenarios we've seen because they're ground truth reality. It's not all the possible vulnerabilities and exploits and whatever else. It's ground truth reality. Here's what we've seen our peers had to deal with. Then look at it from a consequence perspective, which is really rolling into your plants, finding the oldest, crustiest looking engineer possible. I kind of only semi-joke about that. But find the oldest, crustiest engineer you can and go, hey man, what would be a really bad day for you? And go, oh man, woo, the polarity of that turbine was reversed, run. Awesome, thank you. That's a crown jewel now.
I know.
Exactly. Figure out what's the cyber component of how those crown jewels could be impacted without having seen it from a threat perspective. So learn from the threats first, then figure out what's bad look like in your environment anyways, which really is those high impact, low probability events. Go ahead and go to the next slide here. Really basically the common mistakes. We kind of are already alluding to this. We don't have to spend too much time here. But Ramsey, I'm interested in your perspective here as well. But the common mistakes that I see, again, is organizations treating all of their environments the same and not breaking out IT from OT. But also, a common mistake is treating all your OT the same. A transmission substation is going to be different than your generation facility. Pipeline is going to be different than a refinery. Doesn't mean you have to take a different strategy to them. I don't need a roadmap and strategy for every single subset of your business. But on the operations side, have a strategy for that, and the implementation and timing may be different across the different components of your company. And then again, the last thing I'll harp on is if you are vague in doing this, no one's going to get buy-in. Probably the number 3 item there is the one that I hate to see the most, is when you can pull up the roadmap and there's all these complicated surveys and this 3 value plus this 3 value equals a yellow over here. And it's like this giant measurement spaghetti chart. And then you ask like a security operations analyst as they're sitting there going, do you know how to impact the yellow to turn it green? And they have no idea. Or do you understand how to impact visibility in your environment based on how you're measuring it? And they have no idea. If a measurement is going to be valuable, if it's going to be a KPI, if it's going to be something that drives success of your organization, you want it to be simple and cleanly understood from executive down to security operations analyst. Otherwise, you're not going to have buy-in across the organization.
You're spot on, Rob. And, I've seen multiple programs just start with fantastic intentions, get moving along, and then sputter out in the less than a year mark because of just that reason, not having the buy-in, not having the understanding, not having a very clear mission statement, what they're securing and how they're going about doing that. The first one on this, the IT and OT roadmap, as well as having that OT roadmap really be more of a complement and not just a complete separate path. We did have a question in the audience kind of talking about how you leverage IT assets or OT assets and kind of making the best out of those, or looking at kind of common technologies. And I'll tell you, most of the organizations I've worked with the last really 3-4 years have been doing some rationalization in that space, realizing that they've got massive investments in technologies in the IT space that they're also leveraging in the OT space, and they want to figure out how to economize those, or perhaps not pay 25 different licensing schemas when they're already paying for one. You know, a lot of different complexities, but again, kind of comes down to what is the business need and how are you enabling the business? And just because I put in security and gave you a roadmap, how do I live that security and how do I operationalize it? And, you know, if I could say one thing is, as you have an organization helping you build your roadmap, you know, make sure that organization is willing to eat their own dog food, and you know, show you how that will be lived out and how that would be operationalized in one of your plants or one of your facilities, as a kind of not just talking the talk, but walking the walk as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And again, though, I do see, I'll kind of add a perspective on what you said around like form fitting like IT to OT. I see that too often though, where folks want to, so there's an extreme, right? I see it too often where I go, well, I just will want to roll out what I already have so that I can keep it more simple. And you're probably saving money at the end of the day, maybe,
Right.
but you're actually not reducing the risk at all on the operations side. And usually what will happen is from the CISO to like the CEO, you'll ask, well, do you really want to save like 25% of the cost, or did you want to solve this challenge over on the operations side? And the answers sometimes are different depending on where or what executive you ask. Or said differently, I don't want to just come off and say like resources aren't important, but sometimes the resource investment that you're concerned about making, that the CEO doesn't actually care about. What they care about is reducing the impact or the probability of that event. And that's much more critical for the company, especially when you're talking about those scenarios on the operations side of the house. All right, so, and by the way, there was a quick clarifying question too, is how we're talking about like IT and OT. When I talk about OT for this audience, I'm talking about OT and ICS and kind of the segments under there. So everything in classic Purdue model, kind of 3.5 and down. I'm talking about the plant. Very often people look at a system and go, well, that's a Windows system. Like, no, it's not. There's an HMI running on that. That's your operations technology environment. And then we get into this like, well, is it engineering technology? I'm like, stop. It's HMIs, PLCs, RTUs, kind of all of your operations side of the house is what we're referring to here. All right. So from there, let's get into some of the answers and spend the second half of the webcast doing it. Actually, Linda, can you show the slide and go to the next slide, and I'll set that as the stage, and then I'll share my screen. So you can go ahead and share your screen again, Linda. It's the next slide that I need you to show. Perfect. I'm going to show you the answers, and then we're going to whiteboard it out because you all get subjected to PowerPoint way too much. And so what I want to do is I want to subject you to my really crappy drawing, and I'm going to just kind of do this more taking consideration to your questions and kind of draw out an example for you. So kind of an example of what this could look like. So what the process is here, and again, I'm trying to keep it real simple, is first and foremost, determining priorities. I think that's easily stated, but difficult to do. Again, understanding from the business leader perspective, not just inside the security organization. Security is not the mission. We're there to help the mission. So figure out what the mission executors actually need. Then it's going to be prioritizing your assets. And I don't mean your domain controller versus your PLC. I mean your actual plants and sites. So is the power generation station more important than your distribution substation? Is some of your distribution substations actually more important than some of your transmission substations, but some of your transmission substations are the most important to you? Is some wellheads out in the oil field just not that important at all? That's the kind of prioritization we're talking about.
Or somebody in your supply chain for that matter.
Yes.
You know?
Yes,
Again, so
absolutely.
let's not forget our friends there, as a lot of organizations have found out the hard way in the last few months. That
yes,
supply
your
chains
supply
are
chain
vulnerable.
component. Yep, absolutely. No, that's a fantastic point. Then determining your threat and consequence-driven scenarios. We'll talk through how to do that. Then you'll think about the controls you actually want to put around it. Again, people, process, and technology. And then what we're going to do is we're going to divide things into A, B, and C classes. We're basically going to say, here's your crown jewels, which are your A-class assets and your A-class controls. We're going to say, here's your B-class assets and the lesser amount of controls you want to do. And here's your C-class assets, and maybe there's just a couple controls that you do across all of your organization, like your quote-unquote cyber hygiene type things. And this also relates to everything you do. The technology vendor answer is usually go buy my product and deploy it across all your sites. Wrong. You should not be doing that. You should be considering what are the right tools, people, and process, and apply them at the appropriate place, like A-class assets, maybe B-class assets. You're not doing everything at a C-class asset. You have too much to get done, and you will never finish. It's that peanut butter spread we got to avoid. All right, so let's go ahead and shut down that, and I'm going to, again, subject you to my really crappy drawings. I apologize in advance, but it's the easiest way to do this for me personally. So first of all, let's talk about your priorities. And again, I'm going to take some liberties on assuming some things, but it's just to give you a point of view. So let's say that we're going to do an oil and gas or O&G company, and we have to think about our top 5 priorities. I'll start off by saying if we went and interviewed board of directors, the CEO, the heads of operations of downstream, midstream, upstream, that number 1 is going to come back as some aspect of safety. Like we're just generally going to come up with, we really want to maintain the safety of our people and our environments for folks. Number 2, Ramsey, why don't you give me number 2? What do you think it doesn't matter, but what do you think a number 2 example would be here in terms of priorities?
Let's go, I don't know, how about governance?
Okay, so they're going to want some level of governance across the environment that relates probably to either revenue or reliability or some level of that. I'll say that they're going to do it from a revenue perspective, and they all want reliability and whatever else. We all know those things, but what they're going to actually say is we want to make money and we want to stay in business. Safety is going to be first, but then we got to stay in business. The third sort of priority, let's assume that after revenue, they really care about legal and sort of compliance. They don't want to get in trouble with the government. Number 4, to make this just quick, maybe the next thing they care about is public perception. They don't want to have issues that cause public perception issues that then relate to legal compliance. And maybe the last thing the executives care about in construct of just big picture requirements is maybe they do actually care about intellectual property and that there is actual intellectual property they're doing, whether it's prospecting or some level of refinery that they're doing that's specific, and they think that's going to translate up to revenue eventually. So we've got these 5 major priorities. This is a great opportunity for you to conduct this research. Now, you will usually use firms like a Deloitte to help you with this because you've got a lot to cover. But I want the CSO or the CSO or whoever is involved in this, your chief digital transformation officer, whatever, to be intimately involved in figuring out the requirements. And again, these are going to change at every company. We see a number of people jumping in about operational continuity and reliability and production. You're going to get a bunch of opinions, and you're going to have to standardize on 5 to 10 max of what people care about, and you're really going to focus on the top 3 to 4 really to start with. Usually if you have more than 2 or 3 priorities, you don't have priorities.
Yeah, so, I mean, distilling those down, Rob, like you said, can be a challenge in an organization. And I don't want to give the audience here the perception that you've got to run a 6 months or a 9-month, market study that's, questioning everybody on the internet and trying to, decide what's important to you. This can be done in a fairly rapid fashion and probably in parallel while you're doing your technical discovery, as well as kind of doing your business interviews and parts of this process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I care about, again, is get the requirements. These are going to be different for your organization. You're going to have different things pop up. At the end of the day, you need to be aligned as an organization on the requirements, which means that you are going to present your answers back to those executives. Or if you are the executive, you're going to present your answer back to the CEO or board, and you're all going to agree in step 1, yep, this is the right prioritization, because you're building buy-in to your security roadmap. That's the trick, right? You want to make sure that it's not your security roadmap, it's going to be
everybody's.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think the importance here is worth mentioning that, all the relevant teams have a seat at the table. So I think there was a question before on kind of the surveys and did you talk to actual engineers in the plants or did you talk to other folks that are in operational roles on the ground? Like, you absolutely do as part of that.
Absolutely. So step 2, prioritize your assets. So what are you going to do? You're going to take those priorities, and this is okay for an inner security view. It's okay, in other words, to pull your security operations folks, pull some of your senior folks, your directors, make it their project. Go, hey, as you look out across our company, and let's assume we're an oil and gas company. This works for everybody, but oil and gas company, as we look across our oil and gas company, how do you think our sites line up to these priorities? Why don't we develop some criteria? Maybe we weight the first priority with 3 points, the second priority with 2 points, the third priority with 1 point, and go through and assign points. And you can also reach into existing data at your organization, like health and safety data is going to help you in many, especially in oil and gas companies. There's already prioritization of your sites based on environmental impact, health and safety, et cetera.
Business continuity,
Absolutely.
Disaster recovery plans. I mean, this is I guess can be an interesting subject when raised as you go across an organization and you talk to the different locations and plants. It's interesting to see what the perception of what the DR and the business continuity plans are at corporate versus what they really are on the ground.
Absolutely.
So can be an interesting discussion for sure. Is a good source of information if it's accurate, but it's also a good place to start to get an understanding of what is important to the organization. When this was written, perhaps it was some terrorist event, or could have been some sort of physical safety issue due to geography.
Yep, absolutely. So make that a program inside your program. Make it a process inside of your security team. Sit down and do a workshop for a day, a week, whatever it's going to take you. Have everyone do their individual homework. Come to the table like it's a nice big, dinner party, and come up with your prioritization. Go through with a whiteboard and say, you know what, our one refinery, that one's super important, whatever made up name it is. Then 2, the next most critical assets actually this specific pipeline compressor station or this specific port that we have for maritime as it relates to like shipping our product actually ends up being the next one. And go down the list and you'll end up getting down to a start to bottom, like prioritized list of assets with your model. All right, remember, you added some weighting in to have kind of this mathematical like model, whatever it is, 3 points, 2 points, whatever, to make this, no kidding, start to finish list of your assets. And that may seem tedious, but I promise you it's going to be useful here. What you end up then doing is go back to the executives again, go back to other people again, go, this is how we view the organization. Does anybody have any issues? And you're going to get some natural fighting to take place that's really healthy. You're going to find, just like Ramsey was talking about perception, you're going to find the VP of operations of the one plant or the one plant manager. You're going to go, why am I 15? I thought I was 3. And you're going to have some back and forth. And that's good. It's going to help you here in a minute. But eventually, you're going to get buy-in of what the actual prioritized list is. The next step after you do this, I know this is all going quick, but I'll answer questions at the end. The next step is to figure out, what do you want to be protected against? You're basically saying, what are my risks? But here's what I want you to do. I do not want you to go through let's think of the vulnerabilities. Let's think of exploits. Let's think of malware. Let's think of all that. Like, I don't want to do that. What I want to do is look at scenarios of coverage, okay? Because I don't want to get in front of the board and be like, we had 5,000 scans against the firewall. Nobody cares. Or here's 30,000 emails that came in. Nobody cares. What I want to be able to say is, we're an oil and gas company. We really think that one of our top scenarios is based on Xenotime that deployed the Trisis malware. And don't care if I have Schneider or Honeywell or Yokogawa. I'm not making it specific about equipment at this point. I'm saying that there's an Xenotime scenario that got deployed out against a petrochemical facility in Saudi Arabia where an adversary tried to kill people at that site. So it clicks on safety and it clicks on consequence as well, because it ended up having downtime and tens of millions of dollars for that company. So revenue and safety and some public perception in there. Okay, this is an important scenario. And what I want you to do is think through that scenario start to finish. One of the models I'll tell you to use, and again, your mileage vary, do what you want, but what I do is I use the ICS Cyber Kill Chain. So this is a model Mike Asante and I wrote off of the Lockheed Martin kill chain for the intrusion analysis, and it basically talks about a stage 1 and stage 2 kill chain. It doesn't matter all the different steps. The point is, there's stage 1 that typically happens is like the prep action, usually in the IT networks, and there's the stage 2 that happens definitely in the operations technology environment and actually causing impact. And I want to take that Xenotime scenario, and I don't want to make it about the Trisis malware. This is what a lot of companies do, and they fail because of it. I saw this happen with Ukraine as well. Do we have indicators for Black Energy 2? Do we have indicators for Black Energy 3? Why? The adversary might change the malware. In Ukraine 2015, Black Energy 3 was the least important part of the discussion. It was just a remote access tool that gave the adversary access to then pivot into the plants, learn operations environments, and then leverage the environments against themselves. The power outage wasn't caused by Black Energy 3. So I want to step through the adversary's kill chain, all of the observable steps that we have, and step through what were they at each phase. In other words, first they did the malware, then they did lateral movement, then they found a VPN into the operations environment, then they accessed the distribution management system. Work through step by step each step that the adversary did of what those observables were. You're going to translate it to your environment. Again, don't take something out of scope because you're like, oh, well, that was a Schneider Electric system and we have Honeywell. Not the point. Don't make it about the systems. Make it about the tactics and the techniques. You can leverage tools like MITRE ATT&CK for ICS to step through what those might look like. But focus at the tactic and technique level, and you'll have all of these different steps. Because what happens normally is if you go the other way, if you just focus it about a malware, family, exploit, or whatever, is you end up developing one very specific control for one very specific thing. But if you think about the entirety of that kill chain, what you're getting is analytical coverage. I'm getting coverage across it. So even if it changes a little, I'm okay. But more importantly, if any adversary does anything similar to any attacks I've seen, I'm okay. I can detect it. You want to have detection and prevention and response strategies for everything. And we'll pare that down for a second against the scenarios that you care about. Or said differently, I don't want to make it about Xenotime. I don't want to make it about traces. I want to make it on these similar scenarios because it's a myth that adversaries do novel attacks. They do novel steps sometimes, but there's no such thing as a novel attack. There's reuse of tactics and techniques on some step that they did. And you want to make sure you have coverage so that if they change it up a little bit, you're still okay.
I mean, when you think about it, Rob, kind of we're looking at the kill chain, we're looking at, the architecture, how the passive and the active defense, and how we're responding to it, how we would mitigate it. Not like you said, not like, just because they executed a specific command in a specific step, but, yes, they may change it next time, but he still's got to walk in the door the same way at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
But if we're architecting it and putting our defenses in for that type, or that what do you want to call it, like a genotype of attack, we'd still be covered there. And this is a good way to look at it when you were talking about, kind of the frameworks. Once we've determined what our risks and what our kind of attacks are, what our architecture looks like, then we can take our frameworks and see how that would map in and where we need to adjust or where we want to pull the best of class kind of controls out of.
Absolutely.
Here too.
Absolutely. So you're going to do this, and I would recommend, depending on the size of your team and structure and similar, somewhere between 3 and 6 scenarios to start with. So you're going to go through and fully map out what would an Xenotime scenario look like for us. Maybe if I'm an oil and gas company, the next one that I care about is ransomware worm. I'd care about it bringing down operations. So take something like a WannaCry or NotPetya or whatever else we're dealing with and model that scenario out. Again, keep away from the indicator discussion. Think about the class or the style, which is where that MITRE ATT&CK framework is very, very useful. And then I'm going to probably have 3 intel-driven ones. And then I'm going to probably have 3 consequence-driven ones. And if I'm in industries that haven't historically had the same visibility to even see their attacks, maybe I'm in mining. And mining, there's been a lot of targeting of mining, but there's not a lot of visibility into mining networks that you really wouldn't see the things that we care about most anyway. So we don't have a lot of intel on it. We might have some, but not as what we need in like oil and gas or electric or manufacturing as an example. So maybe I have 2 or 1 intel-driven one and then 3 or 4 consequence-driven ones. So you'll find your right mix. If you're in electric, you're probably got closer to 3 to 4 intel ones and then 1 or 2 consequence. If you're in oil and gas, probably 2 to 3 intel ones and the rest consequence. But basically, you would have that consequence-driven scenario and still map it to the kill chain. You would say step by step, what would it look to actually accomplish that in my environment from a consequence perspective of what I care about? At the end of this, you're going to have these 3 to 6 scenarios. Then your security team needs to go through just what Ramsey was talking about with architecture, passive defense, and active defense. This comes from another paper I wrote titled The Sliding Scale of Cybersecurity. It's just a framework to think about large classes of security efforts. So it's not trying to say, go do all these security controls. It's saying, basically, if you boil down all the security efforts we can do, it's architecture-related things, passive defense-related things, which are like tools and technologies, active defense things, which are people getting involved to do things like incident response and security operations, and then intel to sort of feed the process, but we don't need that here. What you'll do is for each step, this is a long exercise, but it's useful. For each step, you're going to think through an architecture, a passive defense, and an active defense control that you have today, and one that you would recommend that would be really useful for that step. And what you're doing is you're taking advantage of what you have today and what works against those scenarios, like Ramsey was talking about earlier, and you're building the roadmap of the things you need that you don't have against the scenarios you're talking about. So my architecture piece, if I was thinking Exenotime, might be that my safety systems need to be segmented away from the larger control environment, because that's how Exenotime moved from the engineer workstation down to the safety system directly and modified the control logic. We don't want to have that. Maybe I could have a safety system air gap, but if nothing else, segment it off and away from it. Maybe my passive defense, in this case, I'm going to be sly here, so the Dragos platform, but maybe my passive defense is the Dragos platform's visibility on the Tri-Station and TSAA protocols and seeing like protocol level abuse that was happening down to that safety system. And maybe my active defense here is I need an incident response plan that takes into consideration ICS cybersecurity trained folks that can operate in an environment that has its safety system compromised. That is a different level of incident response, and that's going to drive different safety considerations around how they might operate in an environment that's actively under attack at a safety level. Maybe it's security operations that I put there. You'll have back and forth on the team of the right control. Don't list out like 15. Try to think of the best one so that you can keep this succinct. Think of the best one that you have today. Think of the best ones that you'd recommend. You're going to do that for every observable step in that kill chain. Holy crap.
As
You're
you
going
said,
to then have, it's going to be a big list. You're going to do this across the 3 to 6. You're going to have hundreds of controls, and you're going to ignore most of them. What you're going to do is you're going to take that list of hundreds of controls and find what are like the 5 or 6 or 7 that we're seeing that are common amongst most of the things we're doing. You know what, the SIM that we have, Splunk, QRadar, ArcSight, whatever, that SIM, that's actually in a lot of the passive detection ones of these things. Awesome. Dragos platform. Man, it's in these ones over here. That's a top list. You're going to prioritize, I would say, probably your top 6 controls. You can do more depending on your budget and resources and time. Maybe top 6 of architecture, top 6 of passive defense, top 6 of active defense. And you're going to be thinking about people and process all along these. Passive defense will generally drive more of a technology discussion. Active defense will almost always drive a people and process discussion, because your people are your active defense. And so at the end, you're going to have a list of controls that give you the most protection, detection, and response capabilities against the scenarios you're concerned with most. Cool.
And I think, Rob, an interesting piece, kind of, once you've gone through this exercise, is that this isn't a point in time.
No.
This needs to be, if you've done it right and you've built it right, it's a continual process. And, as Rob's talking to, yes, the technology certainly helps in a portion of that. But what that allows you to do is to validate those controls that you've put in and make sure that they're working, which again brings us back to that, how do I show the value in this? How do I show that the risk has been reduced in an effective and observable manner?
Absolutely. And so once I have that list of controls, people, process, and technology controls, and get creative. Maybe one of my controls is an active defense component, which is my red team going in and validating those controls. Maybe one of my intel controls is a threat model that I'm constantly reassessing those 3 to 6 scenarios to see if they change over time. But once you have that list of controls, people, process, and technology, then you're going to group your assets into A, B, and C. And this is where the clever, like ABC title for the, maybe not too clever, for the webcast comes. What I want to see you do is say, across my A-class assets, what level of protection, detection, and response capabilities do I feel is really, really important? And maybe this is where you kind of split. You can do it 2 different ways. You can take it where you're looking at it from the controls perspective and you say, my A-class assets get all 6 controls, my C-class assets get 2, my B-class assets get 4. You can take it that way, or you can take it through the scenarios approach, where I say, I really think all 6 scenarios need to be covered here. There's 3 scenarios that I care for all of them. And then there's just like the random ransomware scenario that I care for all of my company. So it's across everything. But I don't really care about the targeted act of state terrorism down to the wellhead that I have out in the field. So you can do it scenarios or controls, and you design out what picture perfect would look like against those crown jewel A-class assets. Then you figure what you can live with your B-class assets, and then the bare minimum of what you would need. I will
How do you
tell
turn
you,
the dial, right?
Yep, how do you turn the dial? I will tell you, in most of what I see, segmentation and an incident response plan are the 2 that go everywhere. You can pick whatever you want, but those are 2 that I generally see down to even the small sites. We want to know how we would respond to it, whatever it is, and we want to go ahead and have some level of segmentation or identity access or some level of like choke points, so that we're not dealing with everything hitting at the
capability, right?
Some level, absolutely. And then you'll kind of work it back up, and you'll have the segmentation and IR on this one, and then whatever else you want in these steps. Usually this is where visibility, because you got to see what's going on. Some level of like detection plan is usually going to be in place. And this can even get super tactical, by the way. As your SOC picks that up and goes, oh, my A-class assets and my B-class assets have detection plans, but my A-class assets are more important. This can even feed into things like severities of what the SOC is dealing with, and then adding in that environmental context to how they do their own planning and prioritization and kind of triaging around your organization.
And that's those interconnects, as IT and OT start to coexist in a better fashion, let's say, it is going to be extremely important how the overarching kind of SOC and those plans plan together, so all this can operate together and aren't two separate organizations as they've always been. Absolutely.
Then this is the next step, but it's still all inside this B and A class assets. This is where you take that list that we made at the beginning, that 1 to 100 or whatever, how many assets you have. Some organizations have 3, some organizations have 1,000. Whatever it might be, this is where you start putting them in the buckets. You go, well, based off of the priorities we already agreed together with the executives, and based on what we're seeing, and based on what right looks like, we have the resources on our security team to do probably somewhere between 10 and 25% of that list in the A class. Probably somewhere between another 25% or so in the B class, and the rest is C class. And you go back and you have that discussion again with the executives to go, we've done our process. This is what it looks like. Here's where we are. And I don't want to game the executives. This should be, we're all bought in together. But the game that kind of naturally forms here is, well, where's the cut line? What do you mean that plant is not going to have the same protection as this plant? Can't I have the same level of protection for all of our assets? Well, no, that's not what we're resourced to do. And you don't want us to be resourced to have the same level of protection everywhere and the same level of detection everywhere. But if you want to have 10% move to 15% or move to 25%, here's the budget to do so, mapped specifically to the controls, mapped specifically to the scenarios that you're concerned with most. And again, instead of just having, we care about phishing, report it to the board, like a lot of folks do, which is silly in my opinion. You use your own mileage.
You tie it to the business problem.
You tie it to the business problem. If you want to be protected against a Xenotime-like scenario, this is what it looks like. And you can't nickel and dime it and do one thing, because the scenario requires these things. And if you want to be protected against that, this is the investment required across people, process, and technology. This is also where your IT security staff sometimes gets told, cool, do the operations side. And they're like, where's the additional budget? No additional people. I won't even pretend that we can protect all of the operations environment in addition to all of the stuff we've been doing in the enterprise with no additional headcount. Not going to happen, full stop, can't approach it. And so just like we're seeing in the comments there, you are absolutely getting the risk appetite of the executives, but you're doing it in a way that's story-driven, with scenario-driven, to fully understand what they're faced against. And instead of it being some ephemeral problem, it's real scenarios that either the threats have shown you or your people are concerned about. And so you're able to present real information to the executives. I see, again, one of my big, I don't want to get too fired up here. One of my big complaints is too many people treat executives like they're stupid. We got to have it in pretty heat maps and others. No, you don't. If like my slides that I present to board members of executives and companies that I go to with electric and oil and gas manufacturing, I've probably done 20 board meetings as a guest speaker over the last year and a half, are the same slides I would present in my SANS class around the problem. But it's around explaining it simply and not hiding behind a ton of metrics and insights and made up heat maps. It's around understanding the scenario and what it takes to do defense and making it approachable to a wide audience. I'm not saying that's always possible, but it absolutely has worked for me. I saw a question earlier, which gets in the last one, which is step 6, which is going and executing against this and measuring it. To me, one of the absolute best KPIs is not how many scans or emails you got. It's how many A-class assets have we finished? Where are we out in that roadmap? That's the most important thing we all agreed on. How is my rollout going? And are there any barriers? Because there will be. And can I report on those barriers so that my executives have levers to pull about, hey, plant guy, why aren't you letting them in? Or wait, why IT security guy, why are you trying to sneak in a patch policy? Because we already said that wasn't important here. You can have that discussion back and forth. Then another key metric is how many of my B-class assets over the years am I moving into A-class assets as my organization and risk appetite changes? And then on my C-class, how many of those are moving into B-class where I'm extending my coverage because I'm doing it efficiently, because I'm learning lessons as I'm building momentum. And what I have established is a way to measure the overall coverage of our organization. Yep. And then I'll shut up here and let you talk to Ramsey, but I get a little bit fired up on this. Then what happens when some black swan or new event happens? We take a look at it. We say, okay, well, that's scenario number 7. Do we all want to add this? They go, yeah, that's really important. Can you do the evaluation? Well, heck, the way that we already invested in the first 6 scenarios, we actually have a lot of coverage on that 7th scenario. And the uptick is only a 10% increase in the budget on the A-class assets to do that, or whatever it is, or 2%, whatever it is. And you're basically showing a maturity in how you're investing, that you're getting results in scenarios you're not even thinking about yet, because that's how coverage is supposed to work. And you give it back to the board. Do you want to be protected against this new scenario? Yes or no? Here's what it's going to take. Or back to the executives. Here's what it's going to take. And you allow them again to make that risk appetite. I find it ridiculous when CISOs are held accountable for the risk at the organization. The CEO is the one that you hold accountable for the risk of the organization. Your CISO and CSOs are advisors about what we need to do with the risk based on what we see out in the real world. Okay, so before I jump in all the questions, Ramsey, what do you have? And then there's like
I just kind of one last point on this, and I know we're bumping up on time here, but you know, as the program's being executed, you know, I can't emphasize enough that you have those KPIs and metrics in place to, you know, as Rob was talking through, showing, you know, how you're protecting the assets, but also how that's being adopted and how that's being lived and really being, you know, embraced by the organization. So this could be tracking training metrics, adoption metrics, but again, it's kind of back to, if you have a strong governance structure and all the groups have voices at the table, this is a continual process. So the folks will always have input because they're always contributing. This is an ongoing effort, not a one-time deal.
Absolutely. So I want to rapidly address a couple quick questions. So one was just thinking about the crown jewels analysis. There's a number of white papers on our website that deal with that. One of them is called Crown Jewel. I think one of them is called Consequence-Driven Threat Hunting. It actually has a nice process there for you to think about crown jewels in general. And the Department of Energy's Consequence-Driven Cyber-Informed Engineering is another really good look at that. The other question was, how do you think about the investments for stage 1 versus stage 2? And I don't. I look at it as, do you want to be protected against that scenario? Because what tends to happen is based on the high frequency, you prioritize stage 1, but you never had the visibility to answer if stage 2 was all that important to you anyways. And so you don't slice and dice the coverage. You go, do we want to be protected against this or not? It's a binary choice. I really hate when folks try to get frequency based. And they're like, what's the probability of this attack happening? It's 1 or 0. Either it happens or it does not. You're not going to predict the adversary. The next question was around top 6 controls and kind of, will there be much variability in organizations? There actually will be. Some of the things will be around the same, but in the implementation, there's a ton of variability. So we might all agree visibility is important, but what does your collection plan for that visibility look like? What are you getting east-west traffic, or are you just getting north-south traffic? On the east-west traffic, are you getting protocol dissection or not? Are you getting host-based logging for visibility, or is it network-based because you have a lot of devices that don't have agents capable in the ICS? The implementation of those controls are going to be wildly different based on that analysis of the consequences and the threats. And then another one was like, do you have a white paper for this? I'm going to make a white paper on this.
We will be making a white paper.
Yeah, I will be making a, yeah, absolutely. The next one, it's a really good question. The next one was like, well, I see a lot of hackers maybe rely on common attack methods. Basically, surely the nation states don't. Do they really rely on non-novel attacks? Yes, 100%. Actually, your state actors are some of the laziest people you've ever met in your life. I've met some of your adversaries. They're not as smart as you think they are. But what I will say is state-level attacks have nothing to do with novel or not novel. State actors use what works. And if the easiest method is the phishing email or the VPN access and then just using native functional protocols, they're going to do that. Actually, from our intel perspective, we see that time and time again, that the state actors targeting ICS are doing the easy things, and they're using living on the land techniques, which is why we push a lot for network-based visibility in the ICS, because they're not spinning up a bunch of malware and similar that's going to have a bunch of host-based logs. It's leveraging the HMI to open the circuit breaker. If they can open it, they can close it using IEC 104 or similar. And then the last thing is like, how does this like relay into MITRE ATT&CK and similar? Actually, this is almost like a master's thesis, not only like master's like class, but like master's thesis for me of this is an overarching umbrella of like talking about it. And then a lot of the other things I've written on or talked about before fit into it. The collection management framework paper you'll find on the Dragos website talks about how to actually roll things out. The cyber kill chain and the ICS cyber kill chain and the MITRE ATT&CK discussion will get you into exactly what TTPs are we looking for. MITRE ATT&CK for ICS work we've been working on is there. The consequence-driven kind of threat hunting gets you to that. There's a lot of these pieces that actually really help you flesh out the implementation of this. What I'll have Linda do, if she'll be so kind, is when we follow up with an email for all those that sign up for the webinar, we'll include like the top 6 or 7 papers that go with this talk of things that are relevant to you that you should consider. And again, then you want to map it back to the frameworks. Your board is going to ask if you're an electric about NERC-CIP. Your board is going to ask if you're an American manufacturer about NIST cybersecurity framework. You want to map those things back. You just don't want to lead it in that direction. Anyways, cool. Ramsey, any final thoughts?
No, I think there was one question on supply chain risk and kind of contract, looking at contracts when they come up for renegotiation. Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of material and samples out there for including cyber clauses in your contracting. Something I think you definitely need to look at as an organization, and it needs to be done frequently and not at a 5 or 10 year mark.
Absolutely. I'm a big proponent of looking at your SLAs anyways, especially in the industrial world. We have vendors like GE and Siemens and Honeywell and similar. There's a bunch of them that, I mean, they're all amazing, don't get me wrong, but eventually you're going to have an incident that relies on some aspect of what they're doing. And you don't want to just be calling them up the day of the incident to figure out things. You're going to want an SLA. Like, hey, if your VPN is compromised that brings into my environment and we can show that, I expect you to provide your side of the VPN's logs. Or even notification. I see too many integrators have like cyber clauses. That's if we not only if we detect there's a breach of our company, but if we detect your data is stolen, we'll let you know. That's crap, because how do we know what their visibility is to even let us know that they know what our data is stolen? So there's a lot of things that consider on the SLAs as it relates to the supply chain, especially in the case of their breach or yours, that you need to think through, and those will come out in this process as well. Anyways, Thanks, Ramsey, for joining me today. The
you,
pitching
Rob.
course is, we've been very happy to partner with Deloitte on a number of these type of engagements. And then if you're looking into like the technology side of the house or the services, that absolutely hit us up. But appreciate your trust and your time today. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully this was useful. And at some point, I'll get off my lazy bum and write the paper for this topic. The webcast was the easier place for me to start. So thanks, everybody. Take care and have a good rest of your day.